Let's talk about one of the most distinguished feature that Power BI has to offer out there. When it comes to reporting solution, Power BI is not just a good-looking reporting solution. It actually is one of those rare enterprise-grade solutions out there where you can create solutions and reports on-prem, publish them on cloud, manage the workgroups, workspaces, your data sets. Within your business, you can exchange them. And really, when you want to, you can take them back in on-prem as well. As part of this OD, let's talk about how do you deploy and share your data sets in PowerBI.com, and also how do you leverage workspaces, which really can make the exchange work in a secured way in an enterprise solution. Let's get started. All right, let's make a start with Objective Domain 5, and that is deploying and maintaining deliverables. In this particular objective domain, we're going to cover two topics: managing data sets and managing workspaces. Let's start with the first one, managing data sets. Once you have created your reports and on Power BI Desktop and have published it on PowerBI.com, it also publishes the data sets. Within the data sets, you will have things like parameters and a few other bits and pieces of the overall model and the data that's contained within it. Please do note that data sets are always published to the workspaces. So that is something that the publisher will have to select as part of publishing the reports itself. Now, when a developer has done that, after that, users are not just able to share the reports. Dataset also can be shared. And that really is a big productivity boost, because for the subsequent development, rather than using new dataset all the time, new developers or the new reports can be developed using the existing datasets, which is already available on PowerBI.com. And that is actually quite useful, because then you don't have a lot of replicated data that's present on PowerBI.com. Management of overall data sets can be managed better by implementation of parameters, which really again can help in scenarios like what-if scenarios, where a report can be pushed to use one particular version over other, and can also be used in incremental incremental refresh of the data as well. When it comes to dynamic reports, when you go and create your reports, if the data is changing, you could enforce the use of parameters, and that will basically influence the reusage of the reports, and specifically in line with the data that has been refreshed, and then the report structure remains as is, except that it now goes back to a different data set. It could be a different time-based resource. It could be a different resource itself. So for example, in this case, we're looking at a particular salesperson, and we are deriving data only for that particular salesperson in our report. And that's how, it can enforce the reusability of your report structure, while a specific salesperson or specific data set could be referenced. So what if parameter is a key player when it comes to something like this? When you are enforcing parameters, you basically are deciding what kind of values that the system by default goes with, and then what other values you want to play the report with and see the outcome. So in this particular case, for example, the system runs with a very specific default value, but then you can also specify the alternate value for that, and then look at the influence of that parameter value and how the visual changes. And for an informed user, that could help in business decisioning and those kind of scenarios. Again, this is a big topic, and there is a good detailed documentation that's available, which basically outlines how you use parameters for things like filtering, for loading very specific data model or data source, for defining certain different measures, and then a lot more than that as well. Another key bit which dataset actually enables us to achieve is scheduling the refreshes. Once the dataset has been defined, you could set out the refresh schedule, or it can be done on demand as well. And also you can check the refresh status and history and everything, whether they have been successful or not successful and all those kind of things, and you can really work with that. Now, there are certain limitations that you need to work with. Again, on Power BI Premium and on shared capacity mode, I highly encourage you to be aware of those. Sometimes they might be referenced in the exam as well. So just look through some of these details, and that is something that will be helpful for you. If you think about incremental data refreshes, do think about how frequently you want to refresh your data, and that can be a factor of how large the data set itself is. If you want to refresh a very large data set, I think refreshing more frequently means that there is a smaller chunk of data volume that's moving with every single refresh, and hence it's better to do that. Again, there is no hard and fast rule on this. You will have to work with your system, with your understanding of the data, and then work with that on what is the right frequency for you and for your solution to work with. When you go and do this, there is a particular order that the solution will have to work with when it comes to refreshing the data. So what you do is basically you define the filter parameters with which you want to work, you apply the filter, then you define the policy around that filter, and then publish that to Power BI service, which then uses that filter to basically refresh the data as it comes along on the set frequency. So something that you need to be aware of. Again, we have just very quickly talked about it. It's probably better if you go and try it out and see how it actually works. All of the steps that we just talked about is again documented quite a lot well. In fact, that's from where we know how it works as well. So please go through that documentation. Again, a quick reminder for everyone that all these links that we are showing you as part of this session, they are coming to you as part of the study guide. So you don't have to worry about you missing it out or anything. So they will be with you pretty shortly. So let's now go back to the next subtopic, which is creating and managing workspace. The biggest differentiator between Power BI and a lot of other competitors out there is the way exchange of information and reports and data sets is supported in Power BI. And that key capability works off the back of the concept called workspaces. When you create reports, when you create data sets and data assets, when you go and be ready to publish it, you go and publish them to the container or the containment rather, which is called workspaces. Different users are part of that workspace. They are granted access to that. And then certain objects like reports and data sets, they are published to workspaces. So that's where the collaboration actually comes to life. When you go and publish your resources there, you can then go and collaborate and exchange them and share them with your colleagues and with your teams. You can create collections of the reports, dashboards can be created, which can then be further shared with the teams and those kind of things. It provides the one single cohesive environment where a lot of this exchange of information and assets can actually happen. And at the same time, security is part and parcel of this whole solution. In fact, the only reason why this actually works so well is because security has been embedded into it from the ground up. So what user groups are part of it, what kind of access they have, all of that is something that you can configure as part of this. And this obviously go and host and house your reports and dashboards and data assets, which you can then exchange. So when it comes to creating the reports and dashboard, if you're willing to explore a bit more on how to go about it, there is a well-documented approach on this, which Microsoft has outlined, again, available on docs.microsoft.com, which will outline all the things around roles and mechanisms and things to be done and what is the overall process. And you can really work through that to basically get it done for yourself and for your teams. So once you have got workspace defined up and roles defined up, that's when you go and assign those roles to user groups or to users. In general, there are 4 key roles that's available for you to play with. Viewer role is the one which only can view the reports and has the most limited number of permissions available. Contributor can do a little more than that. Contributor can actually go and create content and this kind of things. Member, on the other hand, can do a lot more than that, and that is something that you should explore a bit more on. And then admin obviously is almost like a super user who can almost create the workspaces, remove users, add users, and those kind of things. Again, something that you should explore a bit more. And again, just like I have done for John at contoso.com, Bob Joe, if you're listening and you're out there, your mention of Bob Joe here at Tailwind is just coincidental. Now, looking at monitoring usage and performance, that is one of the key features that's available on powerbi.com. When you have created your reports, when you have published those, it's not just about you have developed your part, you have published it, and that's it. You probably are also interested in how the consumption is happening for your reports and for your assets from end user perspective. And that is something which is available as part of the overall solution. There are certain licensing requirements around these things, but let's keep that aside and for you to probably explore a bit more. But you could look at the reports usage, where you can look at things like total views, total number of viewers, what kind of share ranking is going on, what kind of views are there by the users, and views per day kind of a thing. So you can imagine it's almost like capturing a lot of KPIs, which is driven from like how a website works, and basically looks at your data assets and your report assets and how they are being used in the business and shared in the business. And then you also can look at the report performance tab as well, just to look at what is your typical, opening time for the report. Is it slowing down for whatever reason? Is it that it's constant throughout the operation? Maybe if, let's say, a month later after you have published it, from day 1 to day 30, the performance has gone down. So you probably might want to explore a bit more that why is it that? Why is it that when the time has increased, then probably data is also increasing for whatever reason, and then you want to probably explore that a bit more. So all of those things are available, which is available in one central place that you can go and reference back at. Also, let's look at the deployment pipeline itself. When you create your reports, you do want to look at very specifically how do you want to control your deployment pipelines. Now, for your team, for your different companies, you might have a different standard. You might have different ways of looking at things. Deployments and productionization might work a bit differently. But generally speaking, you will probably start with the development stage where you basically design, build, and upload, which probably is more filtered and those kind of things. Testing stages where you will probably start bringing in some of the test user groups, maybe some of the business user groups as well, just as a test suite kind of a thing, who will then go and use the reports, probably provide some feedback. They might be able to share the reports internally and those kind of things. Or if you want to control that as well, you can probably control that. And then finally is the real production stage where you think you have done every bit, and then the report has to be rolled out. And one of these things that I will definitely say is that when you look at all these different stages, do keep in mind how you want to structure your user groups as well. Because you could have a separate user group definition at development stage and a separate one at test stage, and then another production version as well. And just be cognizant of that. But if you can keep them in complete sync exactly as is, that's awesome. If not, just be mindful of that. So again, when you look at configuration of your deployment pipelines, this is something that you can look at. You can define what kind of stages you want to control and how do you go about doing that. And that is something that you can read through and tune to your specific likings and your specific business requirements. So with that, let's go and review some of the practice questions. First one is, which of one of the following is not true of a member workspace role? Options are cannot add or remove users. Second is cannot delete workspace. Third is cannot update metadata about workspace. And then fourth is cannot configure data refreshes. The answer is cannot configure data refreshes. Okay? Because they actually can. So the next one is, which of the following enables you to look historically and analyze what would have happened if a different scenario had played out, and they enable you to look forward to predict or forecast what could happen in the future? Options are what if parameters, or Power Query parameters, or dynamic report parameters, or none of the above. Correct answer is what if parameters. Right, so let's go and review what we covered as part of this particular OD5. In this OD, we talked about dynamic reports and how we make that happen with parameters. We specifically focused on what if parameters, dataset schedule refreshes, incremental data refresh. We also talked about creating workspaces and assigning workspace roles in your organization. We also talked about monitoring usage and performance, and then development lifecycle. So that concludes OD5.